We're going to make it through this. It's part 6 of the Chris Watts prison interview analysis, and we are knee deep in the nonsensical version of the crimes that Chris is trying to pass off as being possible in the real world. We already saw at the end of part 5 Graham's eruption of broken character at his frustration with Chris. But he recovered enough to the point where Chris is still comfortable talking, and unfortunately comfortable enough to, as we get closer to more details of the crime, Chris just gets further away from logic. For example, they kind of veer back into talk about the mistress, and he starts saying, to justify and kind of alleviate himself of responsibility for having an affair, once again, when I was with her, I had no reminders that I wasn't even in the realm of I'm a dad, I'm a husband type thing. I never thought about it. When I'm not seeing pictures, it just never occurred to me that I was a dad or a husband. Sort of implying that if he didn't see his wife and kids in front of him at any given time, he didn't remember that he was a dad or a husband. So I guess we can just put a ham sandwich on Chris's back and starve him to death, because he'll have no reminders that he needs to eat. Hey Chris, got your nose. I got your nose. Whoa, I can't see my nose. I have no reminders that I had a nose. How did you do that? So not only is he going for sympathy yet again, but the truth of the matter is, with this stupid son of a bitch, is that the reason he had no reminders is because he was choosing to spend time with the mistress. He was choosing to leave his house where he had all the reminders and going over to the mistress. So that doesn't make sense if you think about it for more than 2 seconds. And then he has the capper of all cappers, a vague generalization to kind of justify why he would leave his house and go, even though they don't call him out on it. But he has this generalization of anything new always feels better than the old. Anything new always feels better than the old. Maybe a gallon of milk, a new gallon of milk, is better than the old spoiled gallon of milk. Maybe a new car is better than the broken down old car that doesn't work anymore. But when you look at a human being, you should be seeing all of the good memories that the two of you made together. You should be seeing all the hard struggles that you've overcome together, and this relationship that the sum is greater than the individual parts. You should be seeing all of that when you look at a human being. And when it comes to human relationships, old is better than the new, with the exception of, if you get out of an abusive relationship and then into a non-abusive relationship. Obviously, that's the exception where new is better than the old. But my problem is with him making that generalization and trying to justify his bad behavior with it, saying anything new always feels better than the old. Therefore, I could just have an affair because new feels better than the old with anything ever. When, of course, that's not true. It's not the case. And especially not when it comes to human relationships. So further down the slippery slope and the porcelain throne, Chris just contradicts his whole premise. What have we heard more than anything in this whole prison interview? I was out of control. I didn't know what had happened to me. When he's talking about either the crimes or just committing the affair, having the affair, I don't know, I'd become someone in the movies. I didn't know who I was anymore. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know what had happened to me. It's the same type of avoidances of responsibility. Anytime he's confronted with his own bad behavior, instead of taking responsibility, it's, I didn't know what was going on. I don't know what happened. So then, in a nonchalant way, the conversation gets back to his description of how he fell in love with the mistress, or just physical infatuation is more like it. With her, I was more in control. It was more of me coming out. which completely contradicts all of his hundreds of statements, maybe, of I didn't know what was going on, didn't know what I was doing, I'd become someone different, that didn't sit right with me, I'd become someone in the movies, didn't know who I was anymore. With her, I was more in control. There was more of me coming out. It can't be both at the same time, Chris. So which one is it? So this premise is also an attempt for sympathy and playing the victim, which he does all through the prison interview. And ever since he's been found guilty and can no longer deny that he murdered his wife and kids, this has been the card he's been playing, going for sympathy and playing the victim, avoiding responsibility for his actions, which is paramount to any self-contradictions like the one I just mentioned. Because in his mind, he will be blind to these long-term contradictions that we see again and again in these long-form discussions that he has. He will, over time, contradict himself. If you just go by the soundbite of the vague generalizations that he gives in a single soundbite, you can just color it in with your own experiences and relate to him and sympathize with him. But if you look at the long form, you see these contradictions, and he's willing to sacrifice his credibility with these long-term contradictions for the sake of short-term social acceptance. And that works for him to begin with, because a certain unfortunate small segment of the population does socially accept him and ignore these long-term contradictions. And he's able to do that because he has no long-term values to follow. For example, and I don't mean interests or anything like that, but long-term values like honesty. If he had honesty, we wouldn't be talking about any of this stuff. It would be over in minutes. He would have given the true story right away, and we could spend our time on other things. But since he doesn't have those long-term values, he just makes himself look like an idiot to anyone who's paying attention to the big picture. So on that subject of those who hear the sound bites and color it in with their own experiences versus those who look at the big picture, since I've been in both camps, I started off in the short-term camp and now I'm in the long-term camp. The reason for that is because I came away from my first listen of this prison interview with these two big impressions that made me want to revisit it. And then after the second listen, wanted to look into other sources because the second listen, everything was completely unbelievable. And the two big impressions, number one was Chris's seemingly emotional voice that ran through much of this prison interview, and how I halfway believed it, but the reason it was only halfway is because it didn't match his role in the stories he was telling. So that was like, did I miss something there? He sounds emotional, and I feel bad for him, but it's not matching his role in the stories he's telling. I got to listen again. And even more impressionable than that was the other one that came out that I came away with that made me want to revisit it, which was just the overwhelming, crushing silence of his wife and kids. There was many instances throughout this prison interview where Chris is talking and he kind of just peters out and lets it be silent, and the detectives keep it silent to allow him to keep going. And I kept waiting in retrospect for his wife and kids to kind of tell their story, and I realized later it's because no one was speaking for them. Despite all the nice things that Chris is saying to appear like a good guy about them and to come off as a loving husband and loving father, he's never really speaking for them. He's never really telling their story, and that's what was missing in these silences. He was silencing them further by not telling their story. And so I kind of, again, was I missing something? Did I miss something? I got to go back and listen again. Maybe I missed the parts where he defends his family that he allegedly loves and regrets getting rid of. Maybe I missed it. So that's when I went back again and stuff didn't make sense the second time. And then I wanted to go to outside sources to try to get to the real truth. And here we are now. So The real truth, this is it gets really heavy when Chris is describing Shanann's death at his hands. And I've been choked twice in my life, and I can't believe, at least I've never heard anyone say this anytime they go over Chris murdering Shanann. No one's ever said this about the situation that I've heard or written about it that I've seen. The two times I've been choked, you're paralyzed. You can't move. You can't breathe. So one time I went for a fumble in a football game, and someone landed on the shoulder pads, and they pressed the shoulder pads, squeezed my neck closed sideways. So the tubes inside were closed up, and I immediately wanted to say, get off me. Well, first I wanted to get out, but I couldn't move. I was paralyzed. I couldn't open, I was like a fish on a dock. I was opening my mouth to say, let me up, and no words were coming out because no breath was coming out. I couldn't breathe, and I couldn't talk, and I couldn't move because I was being choked by my own shoulder pads. And that was maybe the longest, I don't know how long it was, but it was one of the biggest differences I've ever experienced between how long something actually took and how long it felt. I was completely helpless until the people pressing my neck closed allowed me to get up. And another time, my cousin came up when I was a teenager behind me, and he got me in a full Nelson and was pressing my chin down to such an extent that my neck was closed this way. Instead of sideways, it was this way. I couldn't talk, couldn't breathe, couldn't move. All I could do was hang there in the full Nelson until he was done with me and let me go. And he flung me onto the bed, and I laid there in shock, stunned by another human being having this amount of dominance over me and basically having my life in his hands. So even though I could move after he flung me aside, I, I chose not to because I was in shock. So I feel so bad for Shanann anytime someone describes this that they're not mentioning Chris doing this to her. Probably at first shocked her, even if he wasn't pinning her down. He probably was pinning her down, but even if she had been completely free, she was probably initially shocked by what he did, that he was starting it. And then, even if she wanted to fight back and move, she would have been physically incapable because both of those times that I was choked, they weren't trying to kill me. Chris put his hands around her neck, intending to keep them there until she was dead. So I'm pretty sure she couldn't move, couldn't breathe, and couldn't talk while that was happening. But Chris's version of that is that maybe she was praying to forgive me for what I was doing to her. And then he quotes a meaningless Bible verse to try to justify that out of this world lack of logic that I don't even feel like recounting right now because it's so ridiculous. He's actually, so everything Chris is saying about Shanann sounds real nice. Oh, she was a wonderful mother. She was beautiful. She was great with money. Many of those things he contradicts as well, by the way, that we might get into. But as much as he's talking nice about her and saying she didn't deserve what happened, he's actually murdering her a second time by making up this story of her, why she didn't fight back. You know, Tammy even asked, Tammy knows he's full of crap and says, what was she doing? And Chris says, she wasn't fighting back. Again, wasn't fighting back. I guess I'm innocent. And Tammy says, why do you think she wasn't fighting back? And that's when he says, well, maybe she was praying. Nothing about how he was pinning her down, and nothing about how a person who's having their tubes in their neck pinched closed is physically incapable of fighting back. No, she might have been praying for your dear little soul. And then, to justify his actions of why he just held his hands there and couldn't let go, he says to Tammy, well, if somebody, like you said, if somebody shoots somebody, you don't know what's going through their head. It's easy to play Monday morning quarterback. When actually, we know exactly what was going through somebody's head when they shoot somebody, standing across the room shooting somebody, which is the situation that they're talking about here, the example. Strangulation is more intimate, is what Tammy said, than shooting somebody from across the room. And Chris says, well, it's like you said with shooting somebody. You don't know what's going through their head when they shot somebody, when actually that is the easiest way to read somebody's mind. When they shoot somebody, you know exactly what they were thinking. They wanted to shoot the person that they shot. That's why they shot them. Knowing the consequences of their actions, they decided to do it anyway and take that risk because of how badly they wanted to shoot them. So why couldn't you let go? Why couldn't you just let go, as you keep asking? Because you didn't want to let go. You wanted to keep your hands there until the person whose neck they were around was not alive anymore. That's the answer. We can read your mind on that one. It's one of the easiest situations to read somebody's mind. People's imaginations are such an unknowable gulf of information. How can we ever read them? Well, in those situations, we know exactly what they were thinking and what was going through their head. And it doesn't even qualify as Monday morning quarterback. It's as simple as it gets. And then we get to the part where Chris flat out says, I don't want to talk about this part, honestly. The part where Bella comes in. And then, to distract from revealing his true actions and his true intentions and his true feelings about what he was doing and how he was feeling about when Bella came in, either as he was murdering Shanann or after he murdered Shanann, he forces out these emotional statements. And because he doesn't really feel the emotions that he's trying to portray, it kind of sounds like a cat hacking up a hairball. It's like they're asking him what happened when Bella came in. He says, I don't want to talk about this part, honestly. And then he's trying to distract. So he goes, those are my babies. Those are my girls. I don't see how this could happen. I see pictures of them. I read stories of them every night. Don't see how this could happen. It's like he knows he has to get these out, doesn't like the taste of it, and is just trying to get it over with. So I talk to them every night. Don't see how this could happen. But I bought it the first time. The first time I heard it, I was like, oh, poor guy. He's really emotional about this. But then when I saw some more of the footage of him doing this sound, it's like the same way he sounded when he was saying, in the end of the interrogation, when they're saying, where are they? You're the only one. The house was locked from the inside, and the neighbor's camera only shows you leaving. So the only way that your wife and kids could have left is when you were putting them in the truck on your neighbor's security camera footage, because it didn't show anyone else leaving. The shadow was your daughter, still alive, walking towards you saying, what the hell is wrong with you, you stupid motherfucker? Why are you doing this? Maybe not in those words, but that's what she was thinking. Excuse me. And nobody could have come and gone except for you. And Chris said, no way, because I didn't throw them into my truck. I didn't load anything into my truck except for my tools. I didn't throw them into my truck. And now, those are my babies, those are my girls. Don't see how this could happen. So I thought he was breaking down and crying the first time I heard the prison interview. But now I know this was him forcing out emotions to cover the truth and to distract from the true meaning of these things. He knows his has to get it out. It's unpleasant, so he just muscles it out. And we're running out of time here. I got to get going, but we're going to pick up some time in the next couple of videos, because Chris is about to bring out his old trusty security blanket. The old I didn't know what else to do, and he's going to be covering himself up for a lot of the next few hours of this prison interview. So that's going to make up some time, but we're still going to try to get to the bottom of this complete mess of horse shit and nonsense. I'll see you in part 7.